if we wish to maintain our civilizations, then we must look after the earth and actively maintain its many intricate states of balance so that it achieves the necessary active state of harmony, which is the prerequisite for the health of everything in creation. In other words, that which sustains us must also itself be sustained. And I'm afraid that I've come to the unavoidable conclusion that we are failing to do that. We are not keeping to our side of the bargain, and consequently, the sustainability of the entire harmonious system is collapsing. In failing the earth, we are failing humanity. So, I wonder, is it the case that the problem lies first and foremost not in what we do, but in a fracture within us that leads to a limited view of what and where we are in the natural order, and that therefore we need urgently to look deeply into ourselves and at the way we perceive the world and our relationship with it. If only because, surely, we all want to bequeath to our children and our grandchildren something other than the nightmare that for so many of us now looms on the horizon. But that threat will not go away just because we deny it. We are standing at a moment of substantial transition where we face the dual challenges of a worldview and an economic system that seem to have enormous shortcomings, together with an environmental crisis, including that of climate change, which threatens to engulf us all.
So about a week ago, Prince Charles made a lecture, he delivered a lecture, the Dimbleby lecture, and he talked about sustainability, global warming, the environment, and also the economy. And what he was saying was that our drive for unlimited economic growth is directly causing our environment to collapse. And I think he's got it wrong. I don't think that that's completely right. I agree that his intentions are perfectly correct, that we have to do something to address the environment, but to say that our economic drive is to blame, I think is wrong, because basically everyone talks about consumerism being the problem and how our sort of unquenchable thirst for new stuff is the crux of why the environment is in such a bad way. But basically we've had consumerism for thousands of years. We just haven't been able to mass produce until the last 200 years. People have been making stuff out of wood, copper, all sorts of different materials for thousands and thousands of years. It's just the industrial processes that we've developed over the last couple hundred years have caused the upset in the environment. And so economic growth is not the problem. It's the way that industrial designers, engineers, and such like have created manufacturing processes that aren't sustainable. They take fossil fuels and they use the energy in them to create new products at a very low price. That just simply isn't sustainable. But it's not to say that we can't have consumerism in the future. We can have things, but they have to be made with wind power or geothermal power, all sorts of different renewable energies. And people say that they're not economic. Well, that's only because that they're in their infancy. They haven't been given a fair chance. It's taken such a long time to get power stations up to the efficiency that they are now currently at. How are renewables supposed to compete if they haven't been given fair research and development time? So I don't see a problem in economic growth. I just see, and I think is actually quite a dangerous thing to say, because if you look on Twitter, the reaction to Prince Charles's lecture was Prince Charles, the multi-millionaire, tells everyone that we should stop being so economically driven, that kind of thing. And, it's a bit of a kick in the teeth, really, because he's doing, something really good for the planet. But at the same time, those people are right that it really shouldn't be about economics. And in this next video, I want to show you a different point of view from Amory Lovins, who has some really interesting ideas about how we can become more economically strong, but at the same time be carbon neutral, or much less damaging to the environment. And I agree with Amory Lovins on this. Prince Charles, absolutely brilliant lecture. I would have probably rewritten the part about economics. See you later. Bye.
Our planet is warming up. The consequences could be devastating. That scientific consensus is driving an increasingly urgent effort to curb emissions of greenhouse gases. We're told we have a choice: maximize economic growth or pursue environmental sustainability. But today's guest, an influential advocate for green energy, says we can have both. Should we believe it? Amory Lovins, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Would you describe yourself as a visionary, an idealist, or a man who comes to the table with real, practical, immediate solutions?
Very much the latter. Most of my work is in the private sector, has been for about 30 years, making things happen. My team's lately redesigned $20 or $30 billion worth of mainly industrial facilities in 20-odd sectors to make them extremely energy efficient and much more profitable. And we actually use competition to do our outreach for that sort of work. We help the firms that are good at efficiency do so well in the market that their rivals have to follow suit or lose share.
See, I asked the question because we're going to talk a lot about your proposals for a different approach to energy use. But in the end, one of the key points that you make is that we should move away from nuclear power. And so many other governments and people in the field believe that nuclear power has to be an important part of the mix in the future.
Oh, do they?
Yes,
well,
they do.
But it's not their money, you see. There isn't a penny of private capital at risk in any of the new nuclear projects being built or proposed in the world. They're only bought by central planners, which ought to tell us something.
Central planners, in the end, are accountable to electorates across the world. In the United States, for example, in India, countries which are considering major new investments in
China.
nuclear power. Well, I just talked about America, India, France, Finland. These are all democracies which are choosing to rely on nuclear power for an increasing portion of their electricity needs.
Let's first get our facts right. It turns out that nuclear power is smaller worldwide in both output and capacity than micropower, which the nuclear folks say is too small, slow, and futuristic to need to think about. And it's nuclear...
Well, I'm talking about some basic facts. I'm talking about France, for example,
yes.
where
Okay,
78% of electricity comes from nuclear power generation.
Right, and they haven't built any more for a long time. They're considering building one. The price they're being offered to build it at is extremely high. And now that there's a more competitive electricity market in Europe and you can't hide subsidies as easily as they did to build what they've got, it's very difficult for them to justify building more. The Finnish plant you mentioned, which is already behind schedule, is built with ultra-cheap money that's already in court as an illegal subsidy. It was done by a parliamentary decision using a cooked study, but under a completely uncompetitive arrangement. Again, no private capital at risk, a fixed price long-term contract to buy the power on a non-profit basis. It's not a commercial arrangement.
See, again, I wouldn't want to rely just on the arguments of the nuclear industry. I also look at people like James Lovelock, an environmentalist, a man who's committed to reducing carbon emissions, who indeed believes that such is the problem the world faces now that it's probably too late to avoid catastrophic consequences.
Oh, yes. Well,
and he says, as you know, James Lovelock says, that countries will have to seize nuclear power options if they are to effectively curb emissions.
Well, I certainly respect his ecological insights, but he really doesn't know very much about energy, or he wouldn't say that.
Is there nothing that can persuade you? For example, here in the UK, we have a government which is involved in a major review of energy policy. And what the politicians have told us, having consulted with the experts, is that there is no silver bullet. There will have to be a mix of energy solutions to tackle the CO2 emissions threat.
Well, I actually take markets seriously, not literally, and I look at what markets are actually doing. In 2004, for example, the world added 3 times as much output and 6 times as much capacity from combined heat and power and from renewables other than big hydro as it added from nuclear. The respective industries expect that 4 years from now, those micropower alternatives will add about 160 times as much capacity as nuclear added. Nuclear is going away. There's a very interesting development recently in the U.S. Where Congress voted to subsidize the next 6 nuclear plants to be built, if any, to the tune of their entire capital cost, whereupon Standard & Poor's, lead rating agency, put out 2 reports saying this wouldn't materially improve the credit ratings of the builders. So I think the effect of those enormous subsidies will be roughly that of defibrillating a corpse. It will jump, but it won't revive.